In this lecture, I'm going to be discussing materials. And note that while this section of the course is focusing on the different actor types, that materials aren't actors themselves. They are simply an important property of mesh and brush actors, which is why they are being discussed here. Okay, so a material in the Unreal Engine is an asset that you can apply to the surface of a brush or mesh to make that surface, and thus the geometry behind that surface, look like it's made out of a certain substance. So for example, I could resize this box brush here and use it as a wall. And then if I apply a wood material to the wall, it now looks like a wooden wall. Or if I apply a brick material to the wall, it will look like a brick wall. And as you can see, to apply a material to a surface, all you need to do is select the material in the content browser and drag it into the viewport and onto the surface you wish to apply it to. If you want a material to be applied to all the surfaces of a brush, one way to do this is to select the material first, and with that material selected in the content browser, drag the brush actor into the level, and it will get created with that material applied to all the surfaces of the brush. If you want to apply a material to all the surfaces of a brush that already exists in your level, you can do the following. With the brush selected, look for the Geometry category in the Details panel. If you don't see it, make sure you have an individual surface selected by left-clicking on a surface of the brush. So now, in the Geometry category, click on Select and then select all adjacent surfaces, or use the shortcut Shift-J, and now all the surfaces of the brush will be selected. So now, if I drag a material onto the brush, it will apply that material to all the surfaces. So in addition to dragging and dropping, another way you can apply material to a surface is to use the Surface Materials category of the Details panel. So this works just like replacing the static mesh it did in the earlier lecture. I can use this drop-down box to select the material I want to use. Or I can select the material I want to use in the content browser and then click on this arrow here to apply it. Or if I want to find the material that is currently applied in the content browser, I can click on the magnifying glass to go straight to it. Alright, so now something you should be aware of regarding materials and static meshes is a single mesh might have the ability to have different materials applied to different parts of it, as this object here does. When a mesh gets created in a 3D modeling program, such as Maya or 3D Studio Max, if it has different materials applied to different parts of its surface, once that material gets imported into the Unreal Editor, each of those sections of surface become known as elements, and you will have the ability to apply a different material to each element. So if I drag a material onto this object through the viewport, the material will only be applied to the specific element it was dragged onto. And then you can see in the Details panel, in the Materials category, there are two elements here, and you can set them each individually. Alright, so now textures. I'm not going to go into too much detail about textures in this beginner's course, but just know that textures are what materials are made of. So a material is made up of one or more textures, and each texture is just an image file that defines one of the properties of the material. So one texture might be the actual colors of the material, while another texture maps its smoothness or roughness, and so on. So then this data is combined to form the composite material. And so this drop-down here will show you the textures that make up the currently applied material, and if you select one, it will take you to that texture in the content browser. Alright, so moving on. When the surface of a brush is selected, there will be a Surface Properties category in the Details panel. The first thing in the Surface Properties category is a section where you can pan the material across the surface of the object. So you can use this first row of buttons here to pan the material along its U-axis. Alright, so note that a material uses the letters U and V for its axes instead of X and Y. Okay, and so the different values here represent how much to pan with each click. Or using the last column here, I could enter a custom amount. So as I click one of these buttons here, you can see the material moving across the surface in this direction. The second row of buttons is used to pan the material along the V axis. So if I click on one of these buttons, the material will now move in this direction. Okay, so there's also a section where I can rotate the material relative to the surface it's on. So if I click on this icon here, I can toggle which direction the material will rotate, either clockwise or counterclockwise, and then there are buttons to rotate it 45 degrees, 90 degrees, or a custom amount. So you can see if I click, say, 90 degrees, the material gets turned on its side, so to speak. And then over here, I have the option to flip the material, either along the U-axis or the V-axis. Alright, so the last thing I'm going to talk about is material scaling, or what happens to a material when you resize the actor that it's applied to. So when you scale an actor, the material that is applied to it will get scaled as well, meaning it will get stretched or compressed. Even if I scale the actor first and then apply the material, the effect will be the same. With static meshes, there's no way around this. Brushes, however, are a bit more flexible. If the material on one of my brush surfaces gets scaled, I can see it right here in the Details panel in the Scale section of the Surface Properties category. So as this brush is scaled larger, the bricks and the material are getting larger as well. But if I wanted instead for the bricks to be the same size they were, but for there to be more of them, I just need to set the scale back to a 1:1 ratio and then click the Apply button. And as you can see, that did the trick. So another thing about brushes is that you can edit the dimensions directly instead of having to rely on scaling. And when you change the size of the brush in this way, it doesn't change the scale ratio of the material. So if I use the X, Y, and Z properties of the brush under the Brush Settings category to change the size of the brush, no matter what size I make the brush, the individual bricks of this material remain the same size. Alright, so that will conclude the lecture on materials.